Hey guys, this is how geisha's life before in the afternoon. You would likely have lessons or practice sessions for your various arts. Even established geisha continue to take lessons and to work on improving their skills throughout their careers. You might have a shamisen lesson with your teacher, where you would work on learning new pieces or refining your technique on pieces you already know. You might have a dance lesson, where you would practice movements and work on choreography. You might practice tea ceremony, or work on your calligraphy or engage in other forms of artistic development. The continuing education of geisha throughout their careers is one of the distinctive features of the profession. Unlike many occupations where people complete their training and then simply apply what they have learned, geisha are expected to continuously develop and refine their artistic skills. This commitment to lifelong learning is part of what makes geisha true artists rather than simply entertainers. The best geisha continue to discover new depths and nuances in their arts, even after decades of practice. In the late afternoon, you would begin preparing for your evening's work. If you had engagements scheduled, you would need to start getting ready several hours before your first appointment. You would bathe and begin the process of putting on your makeup and your kimono. As an experienced geisha, you would be skilled at applying your own makeup and would be able to dress yourself in all but the most formal types of kimono, though you might still seek assistance for particularly complex garments or for special occasions. The selection of which kimono to wear for any particular evening would require thought and consideration. The choice would depend on the season, as different patterns and colours are appropriate for different times of year. It would depend on the nature of the engagement and the status of the clients. It would depend on your personal style and preferences. A geisha accumulates a collection of kimono over the course of her career, and part of the art of being a geisha is knowing how to select and coordinate different garments and accessories to create the appropriate impression for each occasion. Your work schedule for the evening would have been arranged by the kenban, which would have informed your okiya or you directly about which parties you were expected to attend. You might have just one engagement for the evening, or you might have several engagements at different locations, requiring you to move from one ochaya to another throughout the night. Each engagement would typically last for 1 to 2 hours, though some might be shorter or longer depending on the circumstances. When the time came for your first engagement, you would travel to the ochaya where the party was being held. If the distance was short, you might walk. If it was farther, you might take a taxi, being careful to protect your kimono and your appearance during the journey. Upon arriving at the ochaya, you would announce your presence and would be shown to the room where the party was taking place. Your entrance into the party room would be a moment of subtle performance. You would open the sliding door and would enter the room with graceful movements, kneeling to greet the guests with formal bows and polite words of greeting. Your demeanor would be poised and elegant, setting the tone for your interaction with the guests throughout the evening. First impressions matter greatly in geisha work, and an accomplished geisha knows how to make an entrance that is both striking and appropriately modest. The party itself might take many different forms depending on the occasion, the preferences of the clients, and the traditions being followed. Some parties are relatively small and informal affairs with just a few guests and 1 or 2 geisha, where the atmosphere is relaxed and conversational. Other parties are larger and more formal events that might involve dinner, multiple courses of food and drink, formal entertainment including dances and musical performances, and numerous geisha and clients. You would need to be adaptable and able to adjust your behavior and your performance to suit the specific situation. Throughout the party, your role would be multifaceted. You would serve drinks to the guests, keeping their glasses filled but being careful not to overfill them or to pour at inappropriate moments. You would engage in conversation, listening to the guests' stories and comments and responding with interest and intelligence. You would laugh at jokes and would contribute your own wit to the conversation when appropriate. You would play games with the guests if they wished to play. You would perform if asked to dance or play music. You would generally create and maintain an atmosphere of refined enjoyment. The conversation at geisha parties can cover virtually any topic. You might discuss business and economics with businessmen, politics with politicians, sports with enthusiasts, arts and culture with patrons of the arts, or any number of other subjects. Being able to carry on intelligent conversation on a wide range of topics requires broad knowledge and quick thinking. It also requires social intelligence and the ability to read the mood and preferences of different clients, knowing when to be serious and when to be light-hearted, when to speak and when to listen, when to flirt, and when to maintain professional distance. One of the skills that distinguishes truly accomplished geisha is the ability to make each client feel that they are special and valued. This requires genuine attention and interest in the client, even when you might have met them many times before or when you might not personally find them particularly interesting. The best geisha are able to find something to appreciate in each client and to create authentic moments of connection and enjoyment, even within the structured and commercial framework of the geisha client relationship. After completing your first engagement of the evening, you would take your leave from the party with the same grace and formality with which you entered. You would thank the guests for their company and would make your exit, likely moving on to your next engagement if you had one scheduled. The movement from one party to another is part of the rhythm of geisha work, and an experienced geisha becomes skilled at managing these transitions, at adjusting to different groups of clients, and at bringing fresh energy to each successive engagement even as the night grows late. The end of your working evening might come anywhere from around midnight to the early hours of the morning, depending on how many engagements you had and how long they lasted. After your final engagement, you would return home, remove your makeup and your formal kimono, and finally rest. Despite the late hours, most geisha appreciate the fact that their working schedule allows them to sleep late in the morning and to have their days relatively free for personal pursuits and for their continuing artistic training. The seasonal rhythms of geisha life. The life of a geisha is deeply connected to the rhythms of the Japanese seasons and to the traditional calendar of festivals and observances. Throughout the year, there are numerous seasonal events, celebrations, and traditions that structure geisha life and that provide opportunities for special performances and activities. Understanding these seasonal rhythms is essential to understanding the full experience of being a geisha. The Japanese traditional calendar recognizes numerous seasonal divisions and observances. Beyond the four main seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, there are more subtle divisions such as the changing of the solstices and equinoxes, the beginning of different agricultural periods, and various traditional celebrations that mark different times of year. Each of these occasions has its own associations and its own appropriate forms of celebration and geisha are expected to be well versed in all of these traditions. The beginning of the year, marked by the New Year's holiday called Shogatsu, is one of the most important times in the geisha calendar. In the days leading up to New Year, geisha have a particularly busy schedule, with numerous parties and celebrations as businesses and individuals host year-end parties called Bonenkai, which means forget the year gathering. These parties are occasions for people to celebrate the conclusion of the old year and to prepare for the new year, and geisha entertainment is often an important part of these celebrations. On New Year's Day itself, geisha engage in various traditional observances. They wear special formal kimono appropriate for the new year. They visit shrines to pray for good fortune in the coming year. They pay formal visits to their teachers to offer New Year's greetings and to show respect. They may also attend special New Year's parties hosted by patrons or by the geisha community itself. The first few days of the new year are considered especially auspicious and are marked by various traditional activities and customs. Spring is marked by numerous important occasions in the geisha calendar. The coming of cherry blossoms in late March or early April is celebrated with hanami, or flower viewing parties, where people gather under blooming cherry trees to eat, drink, and enjoy the ephemeral beauty of the blossoms. Geisha often perform at hanami parties, and the cherry blossom season is traditionally one of the busiest times of the year for geisha work. The symbolism of cherry blossoms, with their brief but intense beauty, resonates deeply in Japanese culture and is often associated with geisha themselves. In Kyoto, the month of April sees the Miyako Odori, which is the dance of the old capital, a major annual dance performance presented by the Geiko and Maiko of the Gion-Kobu district. This performance, which has been held annually since 1872, with only a few interruptions, features elaborate dances performed by many geisha and maiko in traditional costume, accompanied by live music. Similar annual performances are held by the other Kyoto geisha districts at various times during the spring. These performances are major public events that showcase the artistic skills of geisha and that help to maintain public interest in and support for geisha culture. Summer brings its own set of seasonal observances and traditions. The summer months are traditionally quieter for geisha work, partly because the wealthy clients who employ geisha entertainment often leave the cities during the hottest months to escape to cooler locations. However, there are still summer festivals and celebrations that require geisha participation. The Gion Festival in Kyoto, held throughout July, is one of the most famous festivals in Japan and involves numerous processions, ceremonies, and celebrations in which geisha participate in various ways. Summer is also traditionally a time when geisha might take brief vacations or might have slightly more time for personal pursuits and for intensive training. The slower work schedule allows for focused practice and for learning new pieces and new repertoire that can be performed in the busier seasons. It is also a time for maintaining and repairing kimono and other equipment that has been heavily used during the busy spring season. Autumn brings a return to busier schedules as the weather cools and as social and business activities resume after the summer lull. Autumn is celebrated for its own distinctive beauty, particularly the changing colours of the maple leaves, and there are occasions for viewing autumn foliage similar to the spring cherry blossom viewing. The autumn moon is also celebrated in traditional Japanese culture, And there are moon viewing parties where people gather to appreciate the beauty of the full autumn moon while eating seasonal foods and enjoying artistic performances. Winter brings the year full circle, with increasing activity as the year ends and preparations begin for the New Year celebrations. In addition to the busy schedule of year-end parties, winter is also a time for various traditional observances and for enjoying seasonal pleasures such as eating special winter foods and warming oneself at traditional braziers while enjoying the contrast between the cold outside and the warmth indoors. The winter season culminates in the New Year holiday, bringing the cycle of seasons to its completion and beginning it anew. Throughout all of these seasonal changes, geisha are expected to adjust their appearance, their repertoire, and their behavior to accord with seasonal appropriateness. The kimono worn in summer should be of lighter fabrics and cooler colors than those worn in winter. The patterns and motifs on kimono and accessories should reflect the current season, with cherry blossoms in spring, cooling images of water in summer, autumn leaves in fall, and winter landscapes or New Year motifs in winter. The dances performed and the songs sung should be appropriate to the season. Even the topics of conversation and the forms of entertainment at parties are influenced by seasonal considerations. This deep integration with seasonal rhythms reflects the broader Japanese cultural emphasis on being attuned to nature and to the passage of time. The changing seasons are not merely background to human activity, but are actively incorporated into art, literature, food, clothing, and all aspects of cultural life. For geisha, who are custodians and practitioners of traditional Japanese culture, maintaining this seasonal awareness is an essential part of their role. The economic realities of geisha life. While much discussion of geisha focuses on the artistic and cultural aspects of the profession, it is important to understand the economic realities that underlie geisha life. Being a geisha has always been not only an artistic calling, but also a means of making a living, and the economic structures and relationships of the geisha world have shaped the profession in fundamental ways. As mentioned earlier, geisha do not work for fixed salaries, but rather work on a fee-for-service basis, receiving payment for each engagement they attend. The fee structure is complex and involves multiple parties. When a client hosts a party at Ochaya and requests geisha entertainment, they pay fees to the Ochaya for the use of the venue and for food and drink. They also pay fees for each geisha who attends, with the fees varying depending on factors such as the duration of the engagement, the seniority and reputation of the geisha, and the customs of the particular hanamachi. The fees paid for geisha entertainment are distributed through a complex system. A portion goes to the geisha herself, a portion goes to the okiya that houses and manages the geisha. A portion goes to the kenban, the registration office that coordinates geisha bookings and that maintains the organizational infrastructure of the hanamachi. The exact split varies depending on the specific arrangements and on factors such as whether the geisha still owes debts to the okiya for her training and expenses. In the traditional system, young geisha often owed substantial debts to their okiya for the costs of their training, their kimono and accessories, their lessons, and their living expenses. These costs are considerable. A single formal kimono suitable for a maiko or geisha can cost thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. A complete wardrobe of kimono for different seasons and occasions can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lessons from master teachers in the traditional arts are expensive. Housing, food, and other living expenses add to the total. All of these costs would traditionally be advanced by the okiya, with the young geisha expected to work to pay them back over many years. This debt system created a situation where geisha were essentially bound to their okiya until their debts were paid off. This could take many years, and some geisha might never fully pay off their debts, particularly if they were not particularly successful or if additional expenses were incurred. The debt system was controversial and was criticized as being exploitative, essentially creating a form of indentured servitude. Legal reforms in the 20th century limited this system and provided protections for geisha, ensuring that they could leave the profession if they chose and that debts could not be used to bind them indefinitely. In modern times, the economic arrangements of geisha life have evolved, though many elements remain similar to the traditional system. Young women who choose to become geisha today do so more freely than in earlier periods, and while they may still incur debts to their okiya for training and expenses, there are legal protections that prevent the most extreme forms of exploitation. However, the basic structure of geisha working for fees that are split between themselves, their okiya, and the kenban remains in place. The income that a geisha can earn varies enormously depending on many factors. A beginning maiko would earn relatively modest fees, though her expenses would be covered by her okiya. As she gains experience and reputation, her fees would increase. A well-established and popular geisha can earn a substantial income, potentially making as much as or more than successful professionals in other fields. However, geisha also face substantial expenses for kimono, accessories, lessons, and other necessities, so net income is considerably less than gross fees earned. One of the economic realities of geisha life is that success and income are closely tied to building and maintaining relationships with regular clients. Geisha who have numerous regular clients who request them repeatedly for parties have more stable incomes and more predictable schedules than geisha who depend primarily on being assigned to parties with clients they have not met before. Building these relationships requires not only artistic skill, but also social intelligence, charm, and the ability to make clients feel valued and special. The dana system mentioned earlier represented one way in which geisha could achieve economic stability. A dana who provided substantial financial support could help a geisha pay off her debts more quickly, and could provide resources for the expensive kimono and other items necessary for success in the profession. However, the dana system also created dependencies and power imbalances, and it has become much less common in modern times as geisha have gained more autonomy and as social attitudes have changed. Another economic consideration is the question of retirement and security for older geisha. Unlike professions with pension systems or retirement accounts, geisha traditionally had limited provisions for old age. A geisha who worked throughout her career would ideally save money that could support her in her later years, but this was not always possible, particularly for geisha who were less successful or who faced unexpected expenses. Some geisha retired to become okasan themselves, running their own okiya and managing younger geisha, which provided ongoing income and purpose. Others retired from active geisha work but remained connected to the geisha world through teaching or through other roles. Still, others left the geisha world entirely and married or pursued other paths. In modern Japan, geisha have access to social insurance programs and pension systems that provide more security for retirement than was available in earlier periods. However, the economic realities of geisha life still require careful financial planning and management. The glamorous image of geisha life can obscure the fact that being a geisha is a demanding profession that requires not only artistic talent but also business sense and the ability to navigate complex economic relationships. The social world and relationships of geisha. Beyond the artistic and economic dimensions of geisha life, there is a rich social world with complex relationships that shape the daily experience of being a geisha. The geisha community is simultaneously a professional network, a social community, and a substitute family for many of its members. Understanding these social dynamics is essential to understanding the full experience of geisha life. The okiya where a geisha lives, if she chooses to remain in an okiya rather than living independently, is the center of her social world. The okiya typically houses several geisha at various stages of their careers, along with the okasan who runs the establishment and possibly other staff. These women live together, eat meals together, share experiences, support each other through difficulties, and celebrate successes together. The relationships formed in the okiya can be some of the most important relationships in a geisha's life. The okasan, the woman who owns and runs the okiya, occupies a central position in the lives of the geisha who live with her. The okasan is responsible for managing the business affairs of the okiya, for coordinating the schedules and bookings of the geisha, for making decisions about training and career development, for providing guidance and advice, and for representing the okiya in the broader geisha community. The relationship between a geisha and her okasan can be complex, combining elements of a mother-daughter relationship, a business relationship, and a mentoring relationship. A good okasan can be tremendously supportive and can play a crucial role in a geisha's success and well-being. A skilled okasan knows how to promote her geisha to clients, how to secure good bookings, how to manage finances effectively, how to resolve conflicts, and how to provide emotional support during difficult times. She serves as an advocate and protector for the geisha under her care. However, the okasan also has her own business interests to consider, and there can sometimes be tensions between what is best for the okiya as a business and what is best for individual geisha. The relationships between geisha who live in the same okiya are also important and complex. These relationships combine elements of sisterhood, friendship, and professional collegiality, but they can also involve rivalry and competition. Geisha from the same okiya are working in the same profession, often serving the same clients, and their relative success and popularity can affect their status within the okiya and their relationships with each other. Nevertheless, many geisha form close and lasting friendships with their okiya sisters, bonds that are strengthened by shared experiences and mutual support. The formal mentoring relationship between an onesan and her younger sister, established through the Sansankudo ceremony mentioned earlier, is one of the most important relationships in a geisha's career. The onesan serves as a guide, introducing her younger sister to clients and to the social world of the Hanamachi, teaching her the unwritten rules and customs of geisha life, providing advice and support, and helping her navigate challenges. This relationship is meant to last throughout the careers of both geisha and potentially throughout their lives. The younger sister has obligations to show respect and gratitude to her onisan, while the onisan has obligations to support and advocate for her younger sister. Beyond the okiya, the broader Hanamachi is an important social community for geisha. each hanamachi has its own character and its own traditions. Geisha from the same hanamachi share a common identity and have a collective interest in maintaining the reputation and the prosperity of their district. There are regular events and gatherings that bring together the geisha of a hanamachi, including meetings at the kenba, seasonal, celebrations, rehearsals, for annual performances, and various social occasions. Through these interactions, geisha build networks of relationships that extend beyond their own okiya. The relationships between geisha from different okiya can be cordial and supportive, but they can also be competitive. Different okiya are essentially competing businesses, all trying to secure bookings for their geisha and to maintain their reputations. Geisha from different okiya might find themselves competing for the attention and patronage of the same clients. However, there is also recognition that all geisha benefit from maintaining high standards and from supporting the geisha tradition more broadly. The best geisha understand that cooperation and mutual respect serve everyone's interests, even while competition is inevitable. The relationships between geisha and their clients are central to geisha work, but are also complex and carefully managed. The ideal client relationship from a geisha's perspective is one where the client appreciates and respects the geisha's artistry, provides regular patronage that helps the geisha build her career, treats the geisha with courtesy and appropriate boundaries, and understands and accepts the professional nature of the relationship. Such relationships can become long-lasting and can be mutually rewarding, with the client enjoying refined entertainment and the prestige of being associated with a respected geisha, while the geisha gains economic stability and the satisfaction of having appreciative patrons. However, not all client relationships are ideal, and geisha must navigate various challenges in their interactions with clients. Some clients may not fully understand or respect the professional boundaries of the geisha-client relationship. Some may drink too much and become difficult to manage. Some may have unrealistic expectations or may not appreciate the artistry and skill that geisha provide. Experienced geisha develop sophisticated skills for managing these situations, being able to maintain professional boundaries while still making clients feel valued, redirecting inappropriate behavior without causing offense, and generally ensuring that parties remain pleasant and successful, even when dealing with challenging clients. The romantic and intimate lives of geisha are subjects of considerable curiosity and misunderstanding. As mentioned earlier, geisha are not prostitutes, and the geisha profession is focused on artistic entertainment rather than intimate services. However, like anyone else, geisha are individuals with personal feelings and desires, and they may form romantic relationships in their personal lives. Some geisha marry and leave the profession, while others maintain romantic relationships while continuing their careers as geisha. The rules and customs around geisha having romantic relationships have varied over time and between different communities. In earlier periods, there were strict expectations that geisha would remain unmarried during their active careers, as marriage was seen as incompatible with the profession. A geisha who wished to marry would typically retire from geisha work. The dana relationship discussed earlier sometimes included a romantic or intimate dimension, though this was not a requirement and the nature of such relationships varied widely. In modern times, attitudes have become more flexible, and some geisha do marry while continuing their careers, though this remains relatively uncommon. The social world of geisha thus involves a complex web of relationships including the okasan, okiya sisters, mentors and students, geisha from other okiya, the same hanamachi, clients, teachers, and potentially romantic partners. Navigating this social world requires interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, discretion, and a clear understanding of the customs and expectations of geisha culture. For many geisha, these relationships provide support, community, and meaning that extend far beyond the economic and professional dimensions of their work. The preservation and evolution of geisha culture. As a geisha living in the modern era, you would be acutely aware that you are part of a tradition that has evolved significantly over time and that continues to face challenges and changes in contemporary society. Understanding the historical evolution of geisha culture and its contemporary situation is important for appreciating the full context of geisha life today. The peak period for geisha culture was arguably the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the number of geisha in Japan reached into the tens of thousands. During this period, geisha entertainment was a central part of Japanese social and business culture for the wealthy and elite classes. Major business deals were often negotiated at parties attended by geisha. Politicians held gatherings with geisha entertainment. Wealthy men of all types employed geisha to provide entertainment at their social occasions. The geisha districts were thriving communities with numerous okiya, ochaya, and related businesses. However, the 20th century brought numerous challenges to geisha culture. The devastation of World War II had profound effects on Japanese society generally, and on geisha culture specifically. During the war years, many geisha were unable to continue their profession due to material shortages, the mobilization of resources for the war effort, and the general disruption of society. Many geisha districts were damaged or destroyed by bombing. After the war, Japan was occupied by American forces, and the presence of American military personnel and the influence of American culture created confusion about geisha and contributed to misunderstanding that conflated geisha with prostitutes. The post-war period also saw massive social and economic changes in Japan as the country rapidly industrialized and modernized. Traditional arts and customs came to be seen by many Japanese people as old-fashioned and irrelevant to modern life. The younger generation increasingly preferred Western-style entertainment and culture. The strict social hierarchies and formal customs that had supported geisha culture began to erode. All of these factors contributed to a significant decline in the number of geisha and in the demand for geisha entertainment. By the 1970s and 1980s, the number of geisha in Japan had declined to just a few thousand, down from the tens of thousands of earlier periods. Many geisha districts that had once been thriving communities had shrunk dramatically or had disappeared entirely. The remaining geisha districts, particularly the 5 hanamachi of Kyoto, work to preserve their traditions in the face of modernization and changing social values. There were serious concerns that geisha culture might disappear entirely within a generation or two. However, beginning in the 1990s and continuing into the 21st century, there has been a revival of interest in geisha culture both within Japan and internationally. Several factors have contributed to this revival. There has been a broader reappreciation of traditional Japanese culture and arts, with many Japanese people becoming interested in preserving and celebrating traditional aspects of their heritage. Tourism has become an increasingly important part of the Japanese economy, and geisha culture has become recognized as a significant cultural attraction that brings tourists to Kyoto and other areas. International interest in geisha culture, stimulated by books, films, and other media, has also contributed to renewed appreciation and support. As a contemporary geisha, you would be working within this context of cultural preservation and adaptation. You would be consciously carrying forward traditions that extend back centuries while also adapting to the realities of contemporary life. Modern geisha face various challenges that their various predecessors did not face. They must balance traditional practices with modern legal and social expectations. They must find ways to attract and retain clients in a society where geisha entertainment competes with many other forms of entertainment and where traditional social customs have weakened. They must manage their careers in a context where traditional support structures have eroded. At the same time, contemporary geisha also have opportunities and freedoms that earlier geisha did not have. Modern geisha typically enter the profession by choice rather than out of economic necessity or family arrangement. They have legal protections against exploitation. They have access to education and to alternative career options. They can choose how long to remain in the profession and can leave if they wish. Many contemporary geisha speak of their profession as an artistic calling and as a way of preserving and embodying traditional Japanese culture, rather than simply as a means of making a living. The training and daily practices of contemporary geisha remain largely faithful to traditional forms. The arts that modern geisha learn are the same arts that have been passed down for generations. The dances, the music, the tea ceremony, and the other elements of geisha culture maintain their traditional forms, even as the context in which they are practiced has changed. This continuity with tradition is a source of pride for contemporary geisha and is central to their identity as bearers of cultural heritage. However, there have also been adaptations to contemporary circumstances. The age at which girls begin geisha training has increased, as modern education laws require children to attend school until age 15. Most contemporary geisha begin their training in their late teens rather than in childhood. The economic relationships between geisha and okiya have been reformed to eliminate the most exploitative aspects of the traditional debt system. Modern geisha have more autonomy in managing their careers and more freedom to make choices about their personal lives. The client base for geisha entertainment has also evolved. While wealthy businessmen and politicians remain important clients, there has been an increase in corporate entertainment, where companies hire geisha for client dinners or for special events. Tourism has become another important source of business, with various programs that allow tourists to experience geisha entertainment, though these tourist-oriented programs are carefully controlled to ensure that they are respectful and that they do not cheapen or distort authentic geisha culture. As a contemporary geisha, you would likely spend considerable time and energy thinking about how to preserve the essential elements of geisha tradition while adapting to the realities of 21st century life. You would be keenly aware that you are part of a living tradition that must evolve to survive while remaining true to its core values and practices. You would be working with other geisha, with okasan and teachers, and with supporters of geisha culture to ensure that this unique tradition continues to flourish for future generations. The arts and skills of an accomplished geisha. Throughout this discussion, we have mentioned the various arts that geisha study and practice, but it is worth examining these arts in more detail to fully appreciate the depth of skill and knowledge that an accomplished geisha possesses. The life of a geisha is fundamentally devoted to the mastery of traditional Japanese arts, and understanding these arts is essential to understanding what geisha do and what they represent in Japanese culture. Classical Japanese dance, as practiced by geisha, encompasses several different schools and styles, each with its own repertoire and techniques. The most important school for Kyoto geisha is the Inui school, which was founded in the 19th century and which specializes in a refined and subtle dance style that emphasizes understated elegance rather than dramatic gestures. Geisha in Tokyo and other regions might study other schools such as the Hanayagi school or the Fujima school, each with its own characteristics and traditions. The technique of Japanese classical dance is based on principles that are quite different from Western dance. Movement tends to be relatively slow and controlled, with an emphasis on maintaining a low center of gravity and on creating graceful transitions between positions. Hand gestures are particularly important, with specific positions and movements of the hands and fingers having precise meanings and aesthetic significance. The positioning of the feet, the angle of the head, the direction of the gaze, and the expression of the face all contribute to the overall effect of the dance. Each dance tells a story or expresses a mood or aesthetic concept. Some dances are narrative, depicting scenes from Japanese history, literature, or legend. Others are more abstract, expressing seasonal themes or emotional states. The meaning of a dance is conveyed not through words but through movement, gesture, music, and the overall aesthetic presentation. Understanding and performing these dances requires deep knowledge of Japanese cultural references, artistic sensibility, and precise technical control. The shamisen, the three-stringed instrument that is central to geisha musical practice, has its own rich tradition and complex technique. The shamisen is played while sitting in the formal Japanese seated position on one's knees, with the instrument resting on the right thigh and the left hand positioned on the neck of the instrument to finger the strings. The right hand holds the large plectrum called a bachi and strikes the strings to produce sound. The technique of shamisen playing involves coordinating the striking of the bachi with the precise fingering of the left hand to produce the correct pitches and rhythms. The bachi technique is particularly important as the way the strings are struck affects the tone quality and the rhythmic articulation. There are numerous ornaments, slides, and special techniques that add expressiveness to shamisen playing. Additionally, shamisen playing is often combined with singing, requiring the player to coordinate instrumental and vocal performances simultaneously. The repertoire for shamisen is extensive and varied, including folk songs, narrative pieces, theatrical music, and classical compositions. Different genres of shamisen music have different styles and techniques. Juta, a refined chamber music style associated with Kyoto, emphasizes subtlety and elegance. Nagauta, theatrical music associated with Kabuki, is more dramatic and rhythmically driving. Each piece has its own character and its own technical challenges, and building a broad repertoire that can be performed fluently requires years of dedicated practice. The tea ceremony, known as chanoyu or sado, is another art that geisha study extensively. The tea ceremony is not simply about preparing and serving tea, but is rather a comprehensive aesthetic practice that encompasses architecture, interior design, ceramics, calligraphy, flower arrangement, and numerous other elements, all unified by underlying principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. The performance of a formal tea ceremony follows precisely prescribed movements and procedures that have been refined over centuries. Every gesture in the tea ceremony has meaning and purpose. The way the tea bowl is positioned, the way the whisk is used to prepare the matcha tea, the way the bowl is presented to and received by the guest, the way one sits and moves. All of these elements are carefully prescribed and must be performed with exact precision. The tea ceremony is both a physical discipline requiring precise control of movement and a spiritual practice requiring focused attention and presence. Mastery of tea ceremony is considered to take a lifetime, with even highly experienced practitioners continuing to discover new depths in this deceptively simple practice. Flower arrangement, or ikebana, is another art that geisha study. Like tea ceremony, ikebana is governed by aesthetic principles and follows specific forms and rules. Different schools of ikebana have different styles and approaches, but all emphasize principles such as asymmetry, space, line, and the expression of the relationship between elements. Creating an ikebana arrangement requires not only technical skill in positioning and securing flowers and branches, but also aesthetic judgment about which elements to use, how to position them, and how to create an arrangement that is harmonious and expressive. Calligraphy, the art of writing Japanese characters with brush and ink, is yet another skill that accomplished geisha possess. Japanese calligraphy is considered a major art form, in which the same characters can be written in countless different styles, each expressing different aesthetic qualities and different aspects of the writer's personality and state of mind. Good calligraphy requires years of practice to develop the hand control, the sense of composition, and the aesthetic judgment necessary to produce writing that is both technically correct and artistically expressive. Beyond these specific arts, accomplished geisha also possess extensive general knowledge about Japanese culture, history, literature, and arts. They are familiar with classical poetry and can compose traditional verse forms such as haiku. They know the stories and characters from classical Japanese literature and drama. They understand the symbolism of different seasonal motifs and cultural references. They can discuss art, architecture, food, fashion, and numerous other aspects of culture with knowledge and appreciation. This broad cultural literacy allows geisha to be sophisticated conversational partners and to embody and transmit traditional Japanese culture in their interactions with clients and in their performances. The accumulation of all of this knowledge and skill is the work of a lifetime. A geisha who has practiced her arts for decades possesses a depth of mastery that cannot be quickly acquired, and that represents a living connection to centuries of cultural tradition. This is why geisha are respected not simply as entertainers, but as cultural bearers who preserve and transmit essential elements of Japanese civilization. The end of your geisha. Career and retirement. Eventually, like all careers, your time as an active geisha would come to an end. The timing and circumstances of retirement from geisha life vary greatly from individual to individual, depending on personal circumstances, preferences, health, economic considerations, and many other factors. Understanding the various paths that geisha take as they conclude their active careers provides insight into the long-term trajectory of geisha life and the options available to those who have devoted years or decades to this demanding profession. Some geisha retire relatively young, perhaps in their 30s or 40s, choosing to leave the profession to marry or to pursue other paths in life. Marriage has traditionally been one of the most common reasons for geisha to retire, as the demands of marriage and family life are generally considered incompatible with the intensive schedule and the public nature of geisha work. A geisha who wishes to marry would typically retire from active geisha work, though she might maintain connections to the geisha world through informal means or through continuing to practice her arts privately. The decision to retire in order to marry involves various considerations. The geisha would need to consider her relationship with her prospective spouse and whether marriage is truly what she wants. She would need to consider the financial implications of leaving a profession in which she has invested years of training and in which she may have built a successful career. She would need to consider her relationships with her okasan, her geisha sisters, her teachers, and others in the geisha community, and how retiring would affect those relationships. She would need to think about her identity, and whether she is ready to stop being a geisha and to take on a new role as a wife and possibly as a mother. For geisha who marry, the transition can be both exciting and challenging. On one hand, marriage offers the opportunity for a different kind of life, potentially including children and family, which geisha life generally does not accommodate. It offers the possibility of a more conventional lifestyle, with more regular hours and fewer of the demands that geisha work entails. On the other hand, retiring from geisha work means giving up an identity and a way of life that has been central to one's existence for many years. It means leaving behind the community and the relationships that have sustained one throughout one's career. For some geisha, this transition is welcomed, while for others it is accompanied by ambivalence or even regret. Other geisha choose to continue their careers for much longer, working actively well into their 50s, 60s, or even beyond. These geisha have typically found satisfaction and meaning in their work, and have chosen to make geisha life their primary identity and vocation. For such geisha, the profession is not simply a means of making a living, but is a calling and a way of life that they cannot imagine leaving. They may work somewhat less intensively as they age, taking fewer engagements and being more selective about which clients they work with, but they remain active practitioners of their art. Geisha who continue working into older age are often highly respected members of their communities. They possess decades of experience and have achieved high levels of mastery in their arts. They have seen generations of younger geisha come through the system and have helped to train and mentor many of them. They embody continuity with tradition and serve as living repositories of knowledge about geisha culture and about the traditional arts. Their presence provides stability and legitimacy to the geisha districts and reminds everyone of the depth and richness of the tradition. One path that some older geisha take is to transition from being primarily performers and entertainers to being primarily teachers and mentors. A geisha who has achieved high levels of mastery in dance, shamisen playing, or other arts may begin to teach these arts to younger geisha or to other students. Teaching provides a way to remain engaged with the arts and with the geisha community, while working less intensively in the demanding role of active entertainer. It also provides a way to pass on knowledge and skills to the next generation, ensuring the continuation of the tradition. Another option for older geisha is to become an okasan themselves, taking over or establishing an okiya and managing younger, Geisha. This role requires different skills than those of an active geisha. Instead of performing and entertaining, the Okasan must manage business affairs, coordinate schedules, handle finances, provide guidance and support to younger geisha, and represent the Okiya in the broader geisha community. For geisha who have strong business sense and who enjoy working with others, becoming an Okasan can be a fulfilling way to remain central to geisha life, while transitioning out of the role of active entertainer. The transition to becoming an Okasan typically involves either inheriting an existing Okiya from a retiring Okasan, often the Okasan who raised and trained the geisha herself, or establishing a new Okiya. Either path requires substantial resources and commitment. Running an Okiya successfully requires managing complex economic relationships, maintaining high standards while working within tight budgets, developing and maintaining relationships with clients and with Ochaya, recruiting and training new geishi, and handling all of the countless details involved in managing what is essentially a small business. Some geisha retire from active work but choose to remain connected to the geisha world in various informal ways. They might attend events and gatherings in their hanamachi. They might maintain friendships with active geisha and with others in the community. They might continue to practice their arts privately or in small, informal settings. They might serve as advisors or consultants when their knowledge and experience are needed. This semi-retirement allows them to maintain their identity and connections while reducing the demands and pressures of active geisha work. Still other geisha retire completely from the geisha world, leaving it behind to pursue entirely different paths. Some might use skills and knowledge gained during their geisha careers to work in related fields, such as traditional crafts, the hospitality industry, or cultural education. Others might pursue completely unrelated careers or might simply retire from working entirely if they have the financial resources to do so. For these geisha, the years spent as geisha become one chapter in their lives, important and formative but concluded and left behind as they move forward into new phases. The financial aspects of retirement are significant considerations for geisha planning for their later years. Unlike professions with employer-provided pensions, geisha must primarily rely on their own savings and on whatever social insurance programs are available through the Japanese government. A geisha who has been successful and who has managed her finances carefully may have accumulated substantial savings that can support her in retirement. However, geisha who have been less successful financially or who have faced unexpected expenses or difficulties may face economic challenges in their later years. Some support systems exist within geisha communities to help retired geisha. Geisha associations and hanamachi organizations sometimes provide assistance to retired geisha who are in need. Relationships formed during one's active career can also be sources of support, with former clients, okasan, geisha sisters, and others, sometimes providing help to retired geisha who need it. Nevertheless, planning for retirement remains a serious concern for geisha throughout their careers. The emotional and psychological aspects of retirement are also significant. For a geisha who has devoted her entire adult life to the profession, retirement represents a major transition in identity and purpose. The daily rhythms, the relationships, the sense of purpose and accomplishment that came from geisha work all change or disappear when one retires. Some geisha navigate this transition smoothly, finding new sources of meaning and satisfaction in retirement. Others struggle with the loss of their former role and identity and may experience loneliness, depression, or a sense of purposelessness. For many geisha, one of the most difficult aspects of retirement is the sense of leaving behind a community and a way of life that has been central to their existence for decades. The okiya, the hanamachi, the regular clients, the teachers, the fellow geisha. All of these relationships and connections have structured daily life and have provided meaning and social support. Retirement means stepping away from this world, and while some connections may be maintained, they inevitably change and weaken when one is no longer actively participating in geisha life. Despite these challenges, many retired geisha look back on their careers with pride and satisfaction. They take pride in having mastered demanding arts and in having achieved recognition and respect in a competitive profession. They value the experiences they have had, the places they have been, the people they have met, and the things they have learned. They appreciate having been part of preserving and transmitting important elements of Japanese cultural heritage, and they often maintain lifelong connections with the world of geisha even after their active careers have ended. Your eventual retirement from geisha life would mark the end of an extraordinary journey that began when you entered an okaya as a young girl, and that encompassed decades of training, performance, and artistic development. The specific circumstances and timing of your retirement would depend on your individual choices and circumstances, but regardless of how your career concluded, your years as a geisha would have shaped you profoundly and would have given you a unique perspective on Japanese culture, on traditional arts, and on the complexities of human relationships and social life. Reflections on the meaning and significance of geisha life as we conclude this extensive examination of what your life as a geisha would be like. It is worth stepping back to consider the broader meaning and significance of geisha culture. Geisha represent something unique in world culture, a profession devoted to the preservation and performance of traditional arts, combined with the provision of sophisticated social entertainment, all organized through distinctive institutional structures that have evolved over centuries. Understanding geisha life provides insights not only into Japanese culture, but also into questions about art, tradition, gender, work, and the place of aesthetic refinement in human life. One of the most striking aspects of geisha culture is its intensive focus on the mastery of traditional arts. In a world where traditional forms are often marginalized or dismissed as irrelevant to modern life, geisha represent a commitment to preserving and continuing practices that connect to centuries of cultural development. The dances that geisha perform are the same dances that have been performed for generations. The music they play uses the same instruments and follows the same conventions that have been passed down through the Iemoto system for hundreds of years. The tea ceremony they practice follows procedures that were refined in the 16th century. This continuity with tradition is a central part of geisha identity and purpose. The intensive and prolonged training that geisha undergo is remarkable by any standard, beginning in adolescence or young adulthood and continuing throughout their careers. Geisha dedicate countless hours to practicing their arts. This commitment to mastery through sustained practice reflects a conception of artistic development as a lifelong journey, rather than as something that can be completed or finished. The best geisha are always students, always working to refine their technique and to deepen their understanding, even after decades of practice. This approach to learning and mastery has much to teach us about the development of skill and expertise in any domain. Geisha culture also offers interesting perspectives on the relationship between art and entertainment. In Western culture, there is sometimes a sharp distinction drawn between high art, which is seen as serious and meaningful, and entertainment, which is seen as merely pleasurable and commercially oriented. Geisha culture does not recognize this distinction in the same way. The traditional arts that geisha practice are undoubtedly serious and profound, requiring decades of study and offering endless depths for contemplation and interpretation. Yet these arts are presented in the context of entertainment at parties where clients eat, drink, and socialize. The combination of profound artistic practice with the provision of social entertainment creates a unique synthesis that refuses to separate aesthetic refinement from pleasure and enjoyment. The social role of geisha as hostesses and as facilitators of social interaction is another distinctive feature. Geisha are skilled at creating and managing social atmospheres, at putting people at ease, at encouraging conversation and connection, and at handling social difficulties with grace and tact. These are skills that are valuable in many contexts, but that are rarely the focus of systematic training and professional development. The fact that geisha culture recognizes these social and emotional skills as important and cultivates them deliberately suggests a sophisticated understanding of the complexity of human social life and of the value of creating positive social experiences. The question of gender is unavoidable in any discussion of geisha culture. Geisha culture is distinctively and exclusively female, and it has evolved in the context of Japanese society's particular understandings of gender roles and relationships. From some perspectives, geisha culture can be seen as an example of women's agency and women's artistic and professional achievement in a context that offered limited opportunities for women. Geisha are skilled professionals who have mastered demanding arts and who exercise considerable control over their work. They are economically independent and are not directly subordinate to husbands or fathers in the ways that many other women in traditional Japanese society were. From other perspectives, however, geisha culture can be seen as problematic in its relationship to gender. The profession evolved in the context of male entertainment and male pleasure, and geisha exists to serve male clients. While geisha are not prostitutes, and while their profession is focused on artistic entertainment rather than intimate services, the profession nevertheless exists in a framework where women perform and men consume that performance. The traditional economic structures of geisha culture, with young girls being sent to Okiya and accumulating debts that bound them to the profession, can be seen as exploitative regardless of whatever artistic opportunities the profession also provided. Any complete understanding of geisha culture must grapple with both of these perspectives and must recognize that geisha culture is complex and multifaceted, containing elements that can be celebrated and elements that can be criticized. Modern geisha themselves have diverse views on these questions, with some emphasizing their pride in their artistic achievements and their professional autonomy, while others acknowledge the problematic aspects of the tradition while working to reform and improve the profession. The economic structures of geisha culture, which we have discussed at various points, also offer interesting material for reflection. The geisha system is neither a conventional employment relationship nor a simple market exchange of services for fees. Rather, it is a complex network of relationships involving okiya, kenban, ochaya, clients, and the geisha themselves, all interacting according to customs and conventions that have evolved over generations. This system has both strengths and weaknesses. It provides support structures and community for geisha, but it can also limit autonomy and create dependencies. It preserves traditions and maintains quality standards, but it can also be inflexible and resistant to necessary changes. The future of geisha culture is uncertain, as it has been for several decades. The number of geisha has declined dramatically from historical peaks, and recruitment of young women to enter the profession remains challenging. However, the revival of interest in geisha culture in recent decades suggests that the tradition has enduring appeal and value that transcends the specific social and economic circumstances that originally gave rise to it. As long as there are people who value traditional Japanese arts, who appreciate refined aesthetic experiences, and who are willing to commit to the demanding discipline of geisha training, geisha culture will likely continue in some form. For a young woman considering entering the geisha profession today, the decision would involve weighing many factors. She would need to consider whether she is drawn to the traditional arts that geisha practice, and whether she is willing to commit to the intensive training required. She would need to think about whether she's comfortable with the public nature of geisha work and with performing for and socializing with clients. She would need to consider the economic realities and whether she can build a sustainable career as a geisha. She would need to be honest with herself about her motivations and about whether geisha life truly fits her personality, her values, and her goals. For those who do choose to become geisha and who persist through the long years of training, the rewards can be significant. They gain mastery of profound artistic traditions. They become part of a community with deep historical roots. They have the opportunity to experience and embody important aspects of Japanese cultural heritage. They develop skills and knowledge that are rare and valuable. They create memories and experiences that enrich their lives. While geisha life is demanding and not suited for everyone, those who are truly called to it often find it deeply fulfilling and meaningful. Conclusion: the extraordinary within the everyday. This extended exploration of what your life as a geisha would be like has covered many aspects of the profession, from the early training as a child in an okiya through the years of work as a maiko, and then as a full geisha, to eventual retirement in old age. We have examined the daily routines, the artistic training, the economic structures, the social relationships, the seasonal rhythms, and the broader cultural context of geisha life. We have seen that being a geisha involves mastery of traditional arts, skill in social interaction, navigation of complex economic and institutional structures, and embodiment of important elements of Japanese cultural tradition. What emerges from this examination is a picture of a life that is both highly structured and deeply meaningful, both demanding and rewarding, both constrained by tradition and offering opportunities for personal expression and achievement. The life of a geisha is not easy or simple, but it is rich and multifaceted, combining aesthetic refinement, professional discipline, community belonging, and cultural significance in unique ways. The daily life of a geisha involves endless repetition, practicing the same movements in dance, playing the same pieces on the shamisen, applying the same makeup, wearing similar kimonos, attending countless parties that follow similar patterns. Yet within this repetition, there is constant refinement and development. Each time a dance is performed, it can be performed better, with more nuance, with deeper understanding. Each party offers opportunities for new connections, new conversations, new moments of grace and beauty. The extraordinary is found within the everyday through attention, dedication, and commitment to excellence. This is perhaps one of the most important lessons that geisha culture offers to the broader world. In an age that often prioritizes novelty, speed, and dramatic change, geisha culture insists on the value of sustained practice, gradual refinement, respect for tradition, and the discovery of depth within apparently simple forms. The life of a geisha demonstrates that mastery takes time, that beauty can be found in restraint and subtlety, that performing traditional forms faithfully can be meaningful and fulfilling, and that dedicating oneself to preserving and transmitting cultural heritage is a worthy pursuit. Your life as a geisha would not be for everyone, and not everyone should become a geisha. But for those who are drawn to traditional Japanese arts, who value aesthetic refinement, who are willing to submit to demanding discipline and training, who can find satisfaction in mastering complex skills and knowledge, and who want to be part of preserving important elements of Japanese culture, geisha life offers a path that is unique and extraordinary. It offers the opportunity to participate in a tradition that extends back centuries while also shaping that tradition for the future. It offers the challenge of mastering demanding arts, while also providing the satisfaction of achievement and recognition. It offers the experience of being part of a community while also developing as an individual artist and professional. As this extended examination comes to a close, having explored in detail what your daily life, your training, your work, your relationships, and your career trajectory would be like as a geisha, we can appreciate both the specificity and the universality of the geisha experience. The specific details of geisha life, the kimono, the shamisen, the tea ceremony, the hanamachi, the ochaya, and countless other elements, are distinctive to Japanese culture and to the particular historical development of geisha traditions. Yet the underlying themes of artistic dedication, professional discipline, social skill, community belonging, and the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage are universal human concerns that resonate across cultures and across time. Whether you ever become a geisha or not, understanding what geisha life involves provides insights into an important aspect of Japanese culture and into broader questions about art, tradition, gender, work, and meaning. The life of a geisha represents one possible way of organizing human activity and human relationships around the pursuit of beauty, refinement, and cultural preservation. It is a way of life that has much to teach us, both in its successes and in its limitations, both in what it achieves and in what it costs. And it is a way of life that, despite challenges and changes, continues to endure and to offer meaning and purpose to those who choose to embrace it. Boring History for Sleep. Your life as a geisha. Introduction to the world of geisha. The life of a geisha in Japan represents one of the most misunderstood and romanticized aspects of Japanese culture. The word geisha itself means art person or performing artist, and it is composed of two kanji characters, Gei meaning art or performance, and sha meaning person or doer. This etymology is important because it captures the essential nature of what a geisha is and what a geisha does. A geisha is fundamentally an entertainer who has trained extensively in various traditional Japanese arts in order to provide sophisticated entertainment at parties and gatherings. The history of geisha as a profession extends back several centuries into Japanese history, with the recognizable form of geisha culture emerging during the Edo period, which lasted from approximately 1603 to 1868. However, the roots of geisha culture can be traced back even further to earlier forms of Japanese entertainment and to the traditions of female performers and artists who existed in various forms throughout Japanese history. Before we can understand what your life as a geisha would be like, we must first understand the broader context of Japanese society during the periods when geisha culture flourished. Japan during the Edo period was organized under a feudal system, with the Tokugawa shogunate controlling the country through a complex hierarchy of lords, samurai, and common people. Society was strictly stratified into four main classes: the samurai warrior class at the top, followed by farmers, then artisans, and finally merchants at the bottom, though in practice, wealthy merchants often had more economic power than their low, official status would suggest. The Edo period was characterized by relative peace and stability after centuries of civil war. With peace came the growth of cities, the expansion of commerce, and the development of urban culture. The three great cities of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, became centers of culture and entertainment. Within these cities, special entertainment districts called hanamechi, meaning flower towns, developed as areas where geisha lived and worked. It is important to understand from the beginning that geisha were and are distinct from prostitutes, though this distinction has often been blurred or misunderstood, particularly by outsiders. While Japan did have licensed prostitution districts during the Edo period, and while some overlap and confusion existed between different types of female entertainers, geisha as a profession was focused on artistic entertainment rather than on providing intimate services. The relationship between geisha culture and the broader world of entertainment and the pleasure quarters is complex and requires careful explanation to avoid misunderstanding. The training to become a geisha was and is extensive, beginning in childhood and continuing for many years. A girl who would become a geisha would typically begin her training at a young age, entering an okiya, which is a geisha house or boarding house where geisha live and work. The process of becoming a geisha involved multiple stages, each with its own name and its own requirements and expectations. Understanding these stages is essential to understanding what your life as a geisha would entail. Your childhood and entry into the geisha world. If you were to become a geisha, your journey would typically begin in childhood, though the specific age at which girls entered the geisha world varied over time and between different regions and circumstances. In the traditional system, girls might enter an okiya as young as 6 or 7 years old, though in later periods and in modern times, the age of entry became older due to changes in laws and social attitudes about child labour and education. Your entry into the geisha world would most likely occur through one of several pathways. In some cases, families who were poor or who had many daughters might arrange for a daughter to be sent to an okiya. This was not necessarily seen as abandoning the child, but rather as providing her with an opportunity for training in arts and skills that could provide her with a good living. In other cases, girls might be recruited by geisha or by the women who ran okiya who were looking for promising young girls to train. In still other cases, particularly in later periods, girls might choose to enter the geisha world of their own volition, attracted by the glamour and artistic nature of the profession. The okiya that would become your home is a traditional Japanese house, typically with multiple floors, where several geisha and geisha in training would live together under the supervision of the okasan, which means mother, and refers to the woman who owns and runs the okiya. The okasan would become one of the most important figures in your life as a geisha. She would be responsible for your training, for your welfare, for managing your career, and for making many decisions about your life and work. Upon entering the okiya, you would begin the first stage of your journey toward becoming a geisha. In this initial stage, you would be called a shikomi, which means the one who is learning or preparation. As a shikomi, your primary role would be to work as a maid in the okiya, performing various household tasks such as cleaning, cooking, running errands, and generally helping with the daily operations of the house. This might sound like mere drudgery, and indeed much of it would be quite tedious, but this stage served important purposes in your development. Working as a shikomi would teach you discipline, attention to detail, and the proper ways of doing things according to the exacting standards of the geisha world. You would learn how to move quietly and gracefully, how to arrange things aesthetically, how to anticipate needs and provide service, and how to navigate the social hierarchies and relationships within the okiya. All of these skills would be essential in your later work as a geisha. The menial labor of the shikomi stage was also a way of testing your commitment and determination, as only those who could endure this difficult apprenticeship would continue on to become geisha. During your time as a shikomi, you would also begin your formal artistic training. You would start attending classes at the neighborhood's traditional arts school, where you would begin learning the various arts that geisha must master. The specific arts taught would vary somewhat depending on the hanamachi and the traditions of that particular district, but certain arts were universal and essential for all geisha. The most important of these arts was traditional Japanese dance, particularly the classical dance forms associated with kabuki theatre and with older court traditions. You would spend countless hours learning the precise movements, gestures, and poses of these dances. Every movement in Japanese classical dance has meaning and must be performed with exact precision. The positioning of your hands, the angle of your head, the placement of your feet, the expression on your face, all of these elements would need to be controlled and perfected through years of practice. You would also begin learning to play traditional Japanese musical instruments. The primary instrument that most geisha learn is the shamisen, which is a three-stringed lute-like instrument that is played with a large plectrum called a bachi. The shamisen produces a distinctive sound that is central to much traditional Japanese music, and skill with the shamisen is considered essential for geisha. Learning to play the shamisen is quite difficult, as it requires developing calluses on your fingers from pressing the strings, learning complex fingering patterns, and coordinating the strumming of the beichi with the fingering to produce the correct notes and rhythms. In addition to dance and the shamisen, you would learn other arts depending on your aptitudes and the traditions of your hanamachi. You might learn to play the fue, which is a traditional Japanese flute, or the suzumi, which are small drums used in traditional music. You would learn traditional Japanese singing, which has its own distinctive style quite different from Western singing. You would learn the elaborate tea ceremony, which involves the preparation and serving of matcha tea according to precise rituals that have been refined over centuries. You would learn ikebana, the art of flower arrangement, which is based on principles of balance, harmony, and simplicity. You would learn calligraphy, the artistic writing of Japanese characters using brush and ink. The learning of all of these arts would be conducted according to the Iamoto system, which is the traditional Japanese system for transmitting artistic and cultural knowledge. In the Iamoto system, each art form is organized as a hierarchy with a grand master, called the Iamoto, at the top, and with various levels of teachers and students below. Learning occurs through direct transmission from teacher to student, with students copying and repeating what their teachers show them until they have mastered each element. The emphasis is on preserving and faithfully reproducing the traditional forms rather than on innovation or personal expression, at least in the early stages of training. Your days as a shikomi would be long and exhausting. You would wake early in the morning to begin your household duties. You would clean the okiya from top to bottom, prepare meals, wash dishes, do laundry, shop for supplies, and perform countless other tasks. In the afternoon, you would attend your lessons at the art school, where you would practice dance, music, and other arts for hours. In the evening, when the geisha of the house were preparing to go out to their appointments, you would help them prepare, assisting with their elaborate kimonos and hairstyles, and learning by observation how these things should be done. Late at night, after the geisha returned, you would help them change out of their formal attire before finally getting a few hours of sleep and then beginning the cycle again the next day. This rigorous schedule would continue for a period that typically lasted about a year, though it could be shorter or longer depending on your progress and on the judgment of the okasen and the teachers. Throughout this time, you would be evaluated constantly on your progress in the arts, on your demeanor and attitude, on your physical grace and appearance, and on your potential to become a successful geisha. Not all shikomi would continue to the next stage. Some would be deemed unsuitable for various reasons, and would leave the okiya to pursue other paths. But if you showed promise and dedication, you would eventually be promoted to the next stage of your development. Your life as a minarai. After completing your initial training as a shikomi, you would advance to the next stage in your progression toward becoming a full geisha. This stage is called minarai, which means learning by watching. As a minarai, you would make a significant transition from being purely a servant and student to beginning to participate in the actual work of geisha, though still in a very limited and supervised capacity. The transition from shikomi to minarai would be marked by a significant change in your appearance and in your role within the okiya and the hanamachi. You would begin wearing kimono and would start learning how to properly wear and care for the elaborate traditional garments that geisha wear. You would learn how to apply the distinctive white makeup that geisha wear for formal occasions, though your makeup style as a minarai would be somewhat different from that of full geisha, marking your status as a trainee. The white makeup worn by geisha is one of the most distinctive and recognizable aspects of geisha appearance, and learning to apply it properly is a skill that requires considerable practice. The makeup is made from a white powder that is mixed with water and then applied to the face, neck, and chest. The application must be smooth and even, with no streaks or patches. The traditional style leaves certain areas unpainted, particularly the nape of the neck, where patterns of unpainted skin create distinctive designs that are considered particularly alluring in traditional Japanese aesthetics. After applying the white base, other elements of makeup would be added. Your eyebrows would be defined with black or red pigment. Your eyes would be outlined to make them stand out against the white face. Your lips would be painted traditionally with a small amount of red that does not cover the entire lip, but rather creates a small bow-shaped mouth. The exact style of lip painting would indicate your stage of development, with Minarai using different styles than full geisha. As a Minarai, you would begin accompanying senior geisha to their engagements at Ochaya, which are the traditional tea houses where geisha entertain clients. However, you would not yet be expected to entertain guests yourself. Instead, you would observe the senior geisha as they work, learning by watching how they interact with guests, how they perform, how they conduct the various rituals and customs of geisha entertainment, and how they navigate the complex social dynamics of the tea house environment. The Ochaya are establishments that serve as venues for private parties, hosted by clients who have the money and the connections to engage geisha entertainment. These are not restaurants or public establishments that anyone can simply walk into. Rather, they are exclusive venues that require introductions and that cater to wealthy businessmen, politicians, and other elite clients. The Ochaya provides private rooms where parties can be held, and they coordinate with the geisha districts to arrange for geisha to attend these parties to provide entertainment. During your time as a Minarai, you would sit quietly in the corner of the room during these parties, observing everything that happened. You would watch how the senior geisha greet the guests, and how they adapt their behavior to the personalities and preferences of different clients. You would observe the games that geisha play with guests, including traditional drinking games and other forms of interactive entertainment. You would see how geisha pour drinks, light cigarettes, make conversation, tell jokes, flirt in subtle ways that enhance the atmosphere without crossing boundaries, and generally create an atmosphere of refined enjoyment. You would learn that the role of a geisha at these parties is complex and multifaceted. Geisha are not simply performers who arrive, do a dance and leave. Rather, they are hostesses who are responsible for creating and maintaining the social atmosphere of the party throughout the evening. This requires being attentive to the guests' moods and needs, being able to carry on sophisticated conversation on a wide range of topics, being able to laugh at jokes and to encourage the guests to relax and enjoy themselves, and being able to gently manage any difficulties that arise, such as guests who drink too much or who become argumentative. As a Minarai, you would also learn about the economic relationships that underlie the geisha system. You would learn that geisha do not work for fixed wages, but rather work on a complex fee system where they are paid for each engagement, with the fees being split between the geisha herself, the okiya that houses and manages her, and the kenban, which is the office that coordinates geisha bookings in each hanamachi. You would learn about the system of debts that traditionally bound geisha to their okiya, where the okiya would pay for all of the extremely expensive costs of a geisha's training, kimonos, and other necessities, and the geisha would then work to pay back these debts over many years. The Minari stage typically lasts for about a month, though this can vary. During this time you would continue your lessons in the arts, continuing to develop your skills in dance, music, and other forms of traditional Japanese culture. However, you would also now be learning the specific skills of geisha entertainment through direct observation and through beginning to participate in actual geisha work. You would be building relationships with the other geisha in your okiya and in your hanamachi, relationships that would be important throughout your career. One particularly important relationship that you would form during this time would be with your onisan, which means older sister. In the geisha system, each junior geisha is paired with a senior geisha who serves as her mentor and guide. Your onisan would be responsible for teaching you, for introducing you to clients and to the tea houses, for helping you navigate the complicated social world of the geisha districts, and for providing advice and support. The relationship between a junior geisha and her onisan is considered very important and is marked by formal rituals and ceremonies. The selection of your onisan and the formation of this mentoring relationship would be marked by a special ceremony called the Sansan Kyudo ceremony, which is also used in Japanese weddings. In this ceremony, you and your onisan would exchange cups of sake in a ritual that formally establishes your relationship. From this point forward, you would be considered sisters, and you would have obligations to each other that would last throughout your careers and potentially throughout your lives. Your debut as a maiko. After your period as a minarai, you would advance to the next stage in your development, which for geisha in Kyoto is called maiko. The term maiko means dancing child or dancing girl, and it refers to apprentice geisha who are now actively working and entertaining clients, but who have not yet completed their training to become full geisha. The maiko stage is one of the most distinctive and recognizable aspects of geisha culture, particularly in Kyoto, where maiko have a very elaborate and distinctive appearance. It is important to note here that the term maiko is specific to Kyoto, and the maiko stage as a distinct period exists primarily in the Kyoto geisha districts. In Tokyo and other regions, the apprentice stage is generally called hangyoku, meaning half jewel, reflecting that apprentice geisha receive half the pay of full geisha, or junior geisha apprentices may simply be called geisha, with their junior status being indicated in other ways. However, the Kyoto maiko system is the most elaborate and is what most people think of when they imagine apprentice geisha, so we will focus primarily on the Kyoto system in this discussion. Your debut as a maiko would be marked by an important ceremony called the erike, which means collar turning. This ceremony gets its name from the change in your kimono collar from red, which is worn by minarai, to the white collar with decorative embroidery that is worn by maiko. The erike ceremony would be attended by your okasan, your onisan, and other important people in your life as a geisha, and it would mark your formal entry into the professional world of geisha entertainment. As a maiko, your appearance would become extremely elaborate and distinctive. The kimono that you would wear as a maiko would be some of the most beautiful and expensive kimono in all of Japanese culture. Maiko kimono are made of the finest silk and are decorated with elaborate patterns and designs that are hand-painted or hand-embroidered. The colours and patterns of maiko kimono are typically quite bold and vibrant, featuring bright reds, pinks and other vivid colours, with designs depicting flowers, birds, landscapes, and other traditional Japanese motifs. The way you would wear your kimono as a maiko would also be distinctive. The kimono itself would have very long sleeves, called furisode. that would extend down past your hands and would hang down to your ankles. These long sleeves are traditionally worn by unmarried young women in Japanese culture and symbolize youthful femininity. The obi, which is the wide sash wrapped around the waist of a kimono, would be tied in an elaborate bow in the back called a darari obi. This distinctive obi would be extremely long, extending down to the ground and creating a dramatic silhouette. The preparation of your kimono and hair each day would be an elaborate and time-consuming process that would take several hours. Unlike full geisha who eventually learn to wear kimono on their own, as a maiko you would require assistance to put on your formal kimono because of the complexity and weight of the garments. The kimono itself consists of multiple layers, each of which must be arranged correctly. The undergarments must be positioned properly. The kimono itself must be wrapped around the body in the correct way, with the right amount of fabric showing at the collar and sleeves. The obi must be tied with precise technique to create the correct shape and to ensure it will stay in place throughout the evening. Your hairstyle as a maiko would be even more elaborate than your kimono. As a maiko, you would wear your own hair styled in one of several traditional styles called shimada. These hairstyles are extremely complex constructions that involve dividing the hair into sections, wrapping it around various supports and pads, pinning it in place, and decorating it with numerous ornaments. The most junior maiko wear a style called warashinobu, while more senior maiko wear styles called ofuku and other variations. Each style has its own meaning and indicates the stage of development and the experience level of the maiko. The hair ornaments, called kanzashi, that you would wear would be elaborate and beautiful. These ornaments are made of silk, metal, lacquer, and other materials and depict flowers, birds, butterflies, and other motifs. The specific kanzashi worn would change each month to reflect the seasons, with different flowers being appropriate for different times of year. For example, in January you might wear kanzashi depicting pine and plum blossoms. In March you might wear cherry blossoms. In summer you might wear irises or hydrangeas. And in autumn you might wear maple leaves or chrysanthemums. Creating the maiko hairstyle is a specialized skill that requires training and practice. You would visit a specialized hairstylist who works specifically with geisha and maiko. The hairstyling process would take about an hour and would need to be done about once a week, as the hairstyle is designed to last for several days. Between styling appointments, you would need to take special care to preserve your hairstyle. This would mean sleeping on a special pillow called itakamakura, which is a raised wooden stand that supports your neck while keeping your head elevated so that your hair does not get crushed. Sleeping on a takamakura is quite uncomfortable and requires practice to get used to, but it is necessary to maintain the elaborate hairstyle. As a maiko, your daily routine would now center around your work entertaining clients at Ochaya. You would typically have multiple engagements each evening, moving from one party to another throughout the night. Each engagement might last for an hour or two, during which time you would provide entertainment and hospitality for the guests. The specific form that this entertainment took would vary depending on the occasion, the preferences of the guests, and the traditions of the particular hanamachi. At some parties, you would be expected to perform formal dances, either solo or together with other geisha and maiko. These performances would showcase the classical dance training that you have spent years developing. The dances might tell stories from Japanese history or literature, or they might be more abstract expressions of beauty and grace. You would dance to music provided by your own shamisen playing, or by the shamisen playing and singing of other geisha, or by recordings of traditional music. At other parties, or at different points in the same party, your role would be more social than performative. You would sit with the guests, pour their drinks, engage them in conversation, play games with them, and generally create a pleasant and relaxed atmosphere. The pouring of drinks is itself a minor art form in geisha culture, with specific techniques for how to hold the bottle, how to pour, and how to attend to guests' glasses without being intrusive. You would need to be constantly aware of the glasses and needs of all the guests while making it seem effortless and natural. The conversation at these parties could cover a wide range of topics. You would be expected to be able to discuss business, politics, sports, entertainment, and many other subjects with intelligence and interest. This would require you to stay informed about current events and to have a broad general knowledge. You would also be expected to be able to tell jokes, to laugh at the jokes of guests, and to keep the conversation flowing smoothly even when guests were tired or had had too much to drink. The games played at geisha parties are traditional Japanese games that often involve drinking, and that are designed to encourage interaction and create amusement. One common game is called Tora Tora, which is a variation of rock, paper, scissors that involves the players making full-body gestures representing a tiger, a village elder, and a mother. Another common game involves matching fragrances or identifying types of sake by smell and taste. These games require skill and knowledge, but also involve an element of chance and often result in good-natured teasing and laughter. As a maiko, you would work almost every evening except for a few holidays during the year. Your schedule would be coordinated by the kenban, the registration office for your hanamachi. Each day the kenban would inform the okiya about which parties you were expected to attend, where they were located, and when you needed to arrive. You would travel from the okiya to the various uchaya on foot, walking through the streets of your hanamachi in your full maiko regalia. This public visibility is part of the spectacle and tradition of geisha culture, and seeing maiko walking to their appointments is one of the characteristic sights of the historic geisha districts. Your training and development as a maiko. Throughout your time as a maiko, which typically lasts for about 5 years, though it can be shorter or longer depending on various factors, you would continue your training in the traditional arts while also gaining practical experience in entertaining clients. This period represents the core of your education as a geisha, where theoretical knowledge and technical skill are combined with practical application and refinement. Your lessons in dance, music, and other arts would continue intensively during your maiko years. You would typically attend lessons almost every day, spending several hours practicing under the guidance of your teachers. In the Iamoto system under which these arts are taught, advancement occurs gradually through various levels or ranks, each of which requires demonstrating mastery of specific techniques and repertoire. You would work toward advancing through these ranks, taking examinations and receiving certifications that would officially recognize your growing expertise. The dance training in particular would become increasingly sophisticated as you progressed through your maiko years. While as a shikomi and minarai you would have learned basic movements and simple dances, As a Maiko, you would begin learning the major classical dance pieces that are the pinnacle of the tradition. These dances might take 30 minutes or more to perform and might involve complex narratives, subtle emotional expression, and technically demanding movements. Some of these dances are so difficult that they take years to master, and being able to perform them well is a mark of a highly accomplished geisha. Your shamisen playing would also advance to higher levels. While beginners learn basic pieces and practice fundamental techniques, advanced students learn pieces with complex rhythms, unusual tunings, and sophisticated musical structures. You would also learn more about Jiuta, which is a particular genre of shamisen music associated with Kyoto, and Nagauta, which is another important genre. Each piece of music has its own character and its own technical challenges, and developing a broad repertoire that you could perform fluently would take years of dedicated practice. In addition to continuing your training in the core geisha arts, you might also begin to specialize in certain areas depending on your talents and interests. Some Maiko focus particularly on dance and become known as skilled dancers. Others focus on music and become respected musicians. Still others develop reputations for being particularly skilled at conversation and at creating pleasant social atmospheres. While all geisha need to have a foundation in all the basic arts, different geisha develop different specializations and different reputations. An important aspect of your development as a Maiko would be building relationships with regular clients who request your presence at their parties. In the geisha system, regular clients who frequently request the same geisha become patrons called dana. The dana system is one of the most complex and misunderstood aspects of geisha culture. A dana is essentially a patron who provides financial support to a geisha in exchange for her exclusive availability for his entertainment needs and for the prestige of being associated with her. The relationship between a geisha and her dana traditionally involved the dana paying substantial sums to the geisha's okiya to help cover her expenses, which were considerable given the cost of kimonos, accessories, lessons, and other necessities. In exchange, the dana would have priority access to the geisha's time and would have the right to request her presence at his parties. The relationship might also include a personal or intimate dimension, though this was not necessarily required and varied depending on the specific arrangement. The dana system declined significantly in the 20th century and is much less common in modern geisha culture, but understanding it is important for understanding how the geisha system functioned economically in earlier periods. For a Maiko or young geisha, acquiring a dana could be economically crucial because it provided the financial resources necessary to pay off the debts to the okiya and to cover ongoing expenses. The process of acquiring a dana involved complex negotiations between the dana, the geisha, and the okasan, and was governed by various customs and expectations. As a Maiko, you would also be learning the complex social hierarchies and etiquettes of the geisha world. The geisha districts are organized communities with their own internal social structures. There are hierarchies based on age, experience, and accomplishment. There are specific rules about how junior geisha should behave towards senior geisha, how geisha should interact with clients, how geisha from different okiya should relate to each other, and countless other details of proper behavior. Learning to navigate these social complexities would be an essential part of your education. The relationships between geisha are complex and can be both supportive and competitive. On one hand, geisha from the same okiya are like sisters and typically support each other. The mentoring relationship between a senior geisha and her junior sister is meant to be a source of guidance and assistance. Geisha from the same hanamachi are colleagues who work together to maintain the reputation and traditions of their district. On the other hand, there is also competition between geisha for the attention of clients, for the best appointments, for recognition as skilled performers, and for advancement in the ranks of the traditional arts. Throughout your Maiko years, you would also be preparing for the eventual transition to full geisha status. This transition, called Erikai in Kyoto, would mark the culmination of your training and your formal recognition as a full professional in the geisha world. The timing of this transition would depend on various factors, including your age, your level of skill and accomplishment, the judgment of your okasan and teachers, and economic considerations related to the okiya and your career. The transition to full geisha status. After serving approximately 5 years as a Maiko, though this period could be shorter or longer depending on circumstances, you would make the transition from Maiko to full geisha. This transition would be marked by another ceremony also called Erikai, meaning collar turning, which parallels the ceremony that marked your debut as a Maiko, but which represents a much more significant change in status. This transition represents your graduation from apprenticeship to full professional status and would involve significant changes in your appearance, your role, and your career prospects. The most visible change would be in your appearance. As a full geisha, your style of dress and hair would become more subdued and elegant compared to the elaborate and colourful appearance of a Maiko. Your kimono would still be beautiful and expensive, but the colours and patterns would generally be more muted and sophisticated. Instead of the bright reds and pinks of Maiko kimono, you might wear kimono in subtle shades of blue, grey, green, or other more understated colours. The patterns on your kimono would be more refined and less bold, reflecting your maturity and experience. The sleeves of your kimono would become shorter, changing from the long furisode sleeves of a Maiko to the shorter sleeves called tomiso that are worn by married women and by mature geisha. This change in sleeve length is symbolic of your transition from youth to maturity. The obi you would wear would also change, becoming shorter and being tied in different styles than the darari obi of a Maiko. While still elaborate and beautiful, your obi would be more manageable and less dramatically oversized than before. Perhaps the most significant change in your appearance would be in your hair. As a full geisha, you would stop wearing your hair in the elaborate traditional styles that require weekly visits to the hairstylist and uncomfortable sleeping arrangements. Instead, you would begin wearing wigs called katsura when you worked. These wigs are styled in simpler traditional styles and can be put on and taken off as needed, making them much more practical than the natural hairstyles worn by Maiko. The use of wigs represents both practical and symbolic changes. Practically, wigs are much easier to manage than elaborately styled natural hair. You could style your own natural hair however you liked in your personal life, while putting on the wig when you worked. Symbolically, the transition to wearing wigs marked your transformation into a mature professional who had completed the intensive training period of your youth and who had achieved full status in the geisha world. Your makeup would also become slightly different as a full geisha. While you would still wear the white makeup and distinctive lip colouring for formal occasions, The specific style would change to reflect your mature status. The amount of exposed skin at the hairline and neck might be slightly different, and the overall effect would be more refined and less deliberately youthful than the Maiko makeup style. With these changes in appearance would come changes in your role and your work. As a full geisha, you would be expected to take on more responsibility for entertaining clients and for maintaining the atmosphere at parties. While as a Maiko, you could rely somewhat on your youth and your learning status to excuse any mistakes or uncertainties. As a full geisha, you would be expected to be polished and confident in your performance and your social interactions. You would also have more autonomy in your career than you had as a Maiko. While the Okasan would still play an important role in managing your career and your schedule, as a full geisha you would have more say in which clients you worked with, which parties you attended, and how you conducted your career. You would also be in a better position to negotiate your fees and to advocate for your own interests within the complex economic structure of the geisha system. The transition to full geisha status would also potentially affect your living arrangements and your relationship with your okiya. Some geisha choose to leave their okiya after becoming full geisha and to establish their own independent living arrangements, while still maintaining professional relationships with the okiya and with the hanamachi. Other geisha choose to continue living in their okiya throughout their careers, valuing the community and support that the okiya provides. The specific arrangements would depend on your personal preferences, your economic situation, your relationship with the Okasan, and various other factors. As a full geisha, you would continue to perform and to entertain at Ochaya, but your role would be somewhat different than it was as a Maiko. You would be expected to be more sophisticated in your conversation, more refined in your entertainment, and more skilled at managing the social dynamics of parties. You might begin to develop a reputation for particular specialties or skills that would make you sought after by certain clients. You might become known as an especially skilled dancer, or as a talented musician, or as a witty conversationalist, or as someone who was particularly good at managing difficult clients. The economic aspects of your career would also change. As a full geisha, you would command higher fees than you did as a Maiko. However, you would also be responsible for more of your own expenses. The okiya would continue to take a percentage of your earnings, but the split might be more favourable to you than it was when you were younger. If you had a dana, the relationship might continue or might change as you transition to full geisha status. Over time, as a successful geisha, you would ideally be able to pay off any debts you owed to the okiya and to begin accumulating your own savings and resources. Your daily life as an established geisha. Once you were established as a full geisha with several years of professional experience, your daily life would settle into certain patterns while still maintaining the variety and unpredictability that characterizes geisha work. The life of a geisha is not like a typical 9-to-5 job with predictable hours and routine tasks. Instead, it is a life that revolves around entertaining clients at parties that occur mostly in the evening and that vary from night to night in terms of the clients, the venues, and the specific nature of the entertainment required. Your typical day would likely begin late in the morning or around midday, as geisha typically work late into the night and need to sleep late to get adequate rest. After waking, you would have breakfast and would take care of personal matters and household tasks. If you were still living in a nokiya, You would interact with the other geisha and with the Oka-san, discussing the day's schedule and any important matters related to your work. If you were living independently, you would manage your own household and your own affairs. In the afternoon, you